Well, I guess you can say we're in for a treat. Sort of. This is the Bubsy Purrfect collection. But don't let the title fool you, it's far from perfect. As Bubsy would say, what could go wrong with this collection? Well, almost everything. The game does consist of different versions of the past games of Bubsy 1 and 2, and even the one from Atari Jaguar, and even, yes, Bubsy 3D. So there's Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions of both 1 and 2, along with the Game Boy version. Yeah, I'll get that soon. And then we also got Bubsy 3D, which, funny enough, became the last game in the series until some games that came out in recent years for some reason. But we are close to getting a Bubsy 4D game, which looks promising, which I will say that. But in terms of Bubsy 3D in this game collection, they've actually made some sort of refurbished version, which actually improves from the original, which I'll get to soon. So what I do think that makes this collection good is that you can save state anytime, and there's also rewind, just like the other limited run collections that they brought out there. Physical version will come out at some point soon, but it is available on Xbox, PS5, and even on Nintendo Switch, and also on PC. Now, fan reception is mixed, but look, don't let the mixed reception fool you. It's supposed to be a bad collection. I mean, that's how the whole series was known for. But the first game in mind for the Super Nintendo and Genesis is Bubsy and Claw's Encounters of the Third Kind. What a long title. From Accolade, by the way. Oh, I should mention, they also include the Japanese version of the first game as well, which is a pretty nice bonus. Although, I don't know which version it is. It could either be the Super Nintendo or somehow the PC version, because, well, that's exactly what it is. The Japanese version is included, so if anybody wants to play it, I guess. The first game actually did pretty well in terms of reviews, which, by far, everyone would say that it's the best game in the debut, but then we were given a sequel the following year. But this is a 2D platforming game where you collect yarn balls, jump on enemies, and such. But sometimes the little Bubsy guy can go a little too fast in the game, and I say that because if he runs towards a wall, he can actually go BAM! Just like that, all dazed up. Doesn't mean you're dead, but you can get one hit in the game, and sometimes there'll be bonus rooms where you collect a whole bunch of yarn balls. But depending on the time, you can actually beat at the end of the level, and you'll be able to get some more yarn balls. The Genesis version also does the same thing, but the only problem is that Genesis has the worst sound. Yeah, so much for them always bragging how powerful they are, unlike how Nintendo never says anything about them being powerful to the Sega Genesis or whatever. Yeah, if there's one key weakness that the Genesis has, it's the sounding. Yeah, the sounds in this game is just not that great. The music is horrible, and the voice acting for Bubsy is compressed, like super compressed as far as I can tell you. But if you compare that to the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo version just sounds and plays better. But both of them graphically look quite similar with different coloring, of course. But to be fair, the Super Nintendo version came out first. And that one too, the bosses are mostly just yarn balls. Yeah, I hate to say that. And if you know what to do, it really takes about 2 hits. Make it one of the easiest bosses to just get destroyed, but if you somehow mess up one time, then, well, they got you there. And yeah, there are checkpoints sometimes. But sometimes, in certain levels, they can easily get you lost, but if you somehow know where you're going, then you can easily get this game done. But there is a time limit, so you really have to be careful, and that goes for most of the games itself, so it's not that great for terms of timing. Time is huge, don't get me wrong, but it's still not that great. But anyways, the game itself is actually not that bad in terms of the Super Nintendo version. Genesis is fine, I guess, but that's all I can really say about this one. So if you guys ever want to try the game itself, then go right ahead. But of course, we were given a sequel for both Genesis and the Super Nintendo, which both of them are quite similar in a way. The Super Nintendo version has this little hub open thing where you select whichever wing you want to go, but on the Genesis version, you have a menu. I don't know which one's supposed to be better or worse. You guys decide that one. But I think the only problem with this one is that sometimes you might be able to get lost in some levels, but despite all of that, the reception was still pretty good for the most part. But the only exception is the Game Boy version. The reason the Game Boy version is just outright bad is because of the game's frame rate, and there's some elements from its console counterpart that are just flat out missing. So because of the dumb frame rate, it just makes the game unplayable, and you're limited in terms of 2 buttons for controls. So if you guys are gonna play the sequel, then stay far away from the Game Boy version. It's not that great, and it looks worse than any of its other counterparts. And this is just insulting because Donkey Kong Land games have actually looked and run for pretty good for the most part. It's almost like Rare just knows how to make games that can be pushed to its limits, but this one, however, is just not. So yeah, all I can say is that if you guys want to play Bubsy 2, you guys can just do that. But again, stay away from the Game Boy version. It's supposed to have some improvements, but again, the time limit's going to come to play. But then we jump to its next game for the Atari Jaguar. Bubsy in Fracture Furry Tales. Listen, I tried playing this game. I can't get past the first level. The first level, it takes you place in the Alice in Wonderland place or whatever, but there's a problem to this. As soon as you start playing it, there are so many cheap deaths, and even with this game, you get lost, and the time limit again does not help you know where you want to go. Seriously, I have no idea where I'm supposed to go. I'll go one way, then I'm gonna go to the exit. No, I get blocked by a path of spikes. Then I go the other way, finding even more yarn balls, which is cool, and then yet again, I get blocked by another pathway of spikes. I go to the teleporter stuff, and I keep going back and forth over and over and over again, and I can never find the exit. So you can basically see why this game has gotten negative reception. For the most part, of course. But fans will always go and beat the fight as to one of the worst games in the series, but this isn't the worst in the series. But as far as I can say, I just can't even beat the first level just because of how much of a hate. It almost feels like I'm playing a haze maze, like a way to solve it, and every time I do that, I can never find the exit. So it just renders me not to even play this game at all. So really, with the Jaguar game, I just can never beat the first level. No matter where I go, I'm always end up getting lost regardless. I wish I would try to play more of it, but my patience is running out for that game. I can't even keep playing it. I'm sorry, I can't. If you guys want to look into that one, then be my guest. Don't say I didn't warn you though. But next is the main event of Bubsy 3D, which became one of the worst games in history. So this was, again, from Accolade. But what's weird is that the game's graphics just looks like it should just be on a Jaguar instead of on a PS1. No, seriously, if you look at the game's graphics and everything, it's all polygonal, which is something that most games, or at least some games on the Atari Jaguar is known for. But at least they try to make them look good somehow and enjoyable. But not every game is going to be good on the Jag. So this was released in 1996 and 1997, depending which territory you lived in. And you know what's even ironic about this game? This game came out around the same time as Super Mario 64, and that is a comparison. And let me explain. If you were to play the original version on this collection, you'll be dealing with one of the worst tank controls I've ever dealt with. You have to use the D-pad or whatever to turn around, and then you have to go straight, and you have to keep on doing that, and the worst part is the game's camera, because you can't even see half the times. But if you guys want a more improved way to play this, then the refurbished version is definitely the way to do this. It has dual joystick support, full analog movement of a 360 degrees, and also the camera actually functions in this version, which makes the better way to play this worst game in the series. Now this game does have 18 levels for you guys to play, and let me tell you guys this. The game was universally given negative reception by a lot of people, and a lot of publications too, but for some weird reason, PlayStation Extreme gave the game the Gold X Award, which is weird. Oh, and you know what's even funny about the Gold Award thing? There's a trophy guide in the whole catalog of the Bubsy 3D game that actually refers to the Golden Award, which I do think is a nice cameo that it makes. Trust me, you'll want to look into it. But despite it being heavily or somewhat improved of the refurbished version, they still have problems. One, sometimes you can't even see if the enemy is shooting you or not because of how small either the little bullet things they shoot at you, or two, the bullet things matches the same exact color as the little white tiles that you'll be stepping on. And I can't even tell you how many times I have seen enemies and can never tell if I'm actually gonna get shot or not. But in terms of possibilities and everything, you can try to avoid this. There's power-ups like an electric thing where you can bash through enemies in the game itself. There's also rocket pieces for you guys to collect. I think this is more like if you want a 100% completion, then there's 2 rocket pieces at each level. And they do tell you this at the beginning of the game, which is pretty good. However, even if you know where the rocket pieces are, getting there is a difficult task. And I'm not making this up when I say this. Let me be real here. There'll be times where I see it, but then it's like if I look up for a guide, I can never find it, which is just makes getting the rockets just completely unobtainable. Oh, and there's also boss fights in the game, which no, they do not have the rocket pieces, if asking. But going through underwater has to be the worst thing I've encountered. You can ascend and descend, but the oxygen in this thing is garbage. Let me tell you why. The oxygen is limited, but there are oxygen tanks you can grab. However, there's a boost by pressing the triangle or at least the top face button, but it wastes so much of your oxygen, which I have no idea as to why this was even a thing. Yes, you can hit enemies with it, but there's the problem. There's enemies in underwater, like a shark and a starfish, that even though you're far away, they can just attack you with one hit whenever they feel like it. So I just question as to how this even became about. Also, with the refurbished version, I've noticed some issues that it kind of questions if this is a rushed port or some sort of enhanced version. Now, it does play in 16:9, which, granted, it does not look stretched, which I do think is good. However, there are some issues with the emulation. For one, for certain FMVs that I've encountered some carbon issues, which, by the way, the carbon is the carbon engine for anyone that's not familiar. Yeah, the carbon engine is basically an emulation engine for older games, which, sadly, there are some times where I'll encounter some artificial glitches, which is all like green and black filter for whatever reason being, which is something I had an issue with Gex Collection on Nintendo Switch too, because of the compatibility issue, despite the fact that it said that it was fine for you to play. However, I can tell you that the Switch 2 version has been patched. So meaning if you want to play the Switch 1 version of Gex, you can do that. But again, I wasn't sure if it was going to be the same thing when it came to the Bubsy, so I decided to play it on PS5 instead. Half the times too is that sometimes when I played this game, Bubsy 3D, I'll actually try to land on something, and sometimes, even when I attempt to jump, the character will fall off for no reason being. Or sometimes, when you grab on a ledge, it almost either acts like it never tries to grab the ledge, or the fact that when I get up from the ledge, I get cheaply shot by an enemy regardless. And another issue too is like sometimes when you jump, you can't see where you're landing. Well, you sort of can, but there was another issue where certain levels plays in its traditional tank controls for some reason, like the bonus room and one of the later levels, which I have to ask if they did any proper testing. Because if you're gonna sit there and call it a refurbished version, then why don't you just live up with the name? But regardless of that, the refurbished version does have that improvement of the joystick, so that's like one of the major changes, preventing it from being one of the worst games to ever be released. But again, you're still going to be dealing with one of the worst games in the franchise, and I'm not making that up either. A lot of publications will tell you that. So while I was still making this video, I noticed that the game collection got a patch, which I assume pretty much fixed some of the issues I just addressed. But again, the Bubsy collection all means it's not a perfect collection like it tries to claim. I think that's just a joke of a gag, and it pretty much shows. But like I once said, it's like the Bubsy 4D, it looks promising. And so I'm thinking about getting that game and talking about it. Unless you guys also want me to play some of the other Bubsies that also came out on modern systems for you guys to know if they're any good or not. But yeah, the game collection in a nutshell, some are good games and some of them are bad, but also bad that they got improved. But in regards, it really depends on your choice. Should you get this or not? It's up to you. But if you guys have always been wanting to play some Jaguar games, and there's only one game in this entire collection, and that's pretty much it. I'm actually surprised they actually got the Jaguar emulation running for the Carbon engine, despite never like saying anything about Jaguar games, which I guess if we do give them enough support, we might as well get some more Jaguar games. We did get some Jaguar games in the Atari collections, but that's about it. But in regard, if you guys are uncertain, you can always wait for a sale to happen. I mean, it is $20 for the entire collection, unless you really want to wait for like maybe a $10 or whatever. But again, you're getting some decent games here. But this game is not going to be for everybody, because there is a lot of cheap thefts in these games itself. So I'll let it be up to you. And if you guys are pretty much convinced to getting a Bubsy 4D after playing all this, then go ahead and be my guest.